Hey everyone, welcome to Growth Sessions. I am here with Freddie Liversidge, Global Head of Media at HP. Freddie, thanks so much for being here. It's awesome to have you.
Yeah, great to be here too. And thanks, Adam.
And so Freddie, on your LinkedIn, I believe it shows that you're building an in-house agency at HP. This notion of in-housing versus agency, I think, is something that you're uniquely able to have a perspective on based on your career. I'd love to know, without going too far deep into your bio, the steps you've taken along the journey to be in the position that you're in and why that gives you this unique perspective of in-housing versus agencies.
When I started my life in media agencies, grew up in the world of programmatic. And as I was growing up in my career, I really noticed the more and more we started to use platforms, the more and more this industry didn't need to be specialized necessarily to the same level inside an agency. And so I jumped out of there and went into consulting to help brands bring media in-house. And I don't know if I would say I went too early. Maybe I did a little bit. So I went back to the agency.
And out of curiosity, the bringing brands in-house, when were you at this consultancy? Because I know that's been a theme in advertising for the past maybe decade or so. I'm curious to know when you were allocating time towards this.
I was there 2016, 2017. So it definitely had already started.
And what was the narrative then? What was the impetus then? And how might it be slightly different than the impetus that it is right now?
The impetus that really made me make the move was there was a really big A&A study that came out that talked all about the hidden margins and some of the dodgy things, I guess you could say, going on in the agency world and kickbacks and so forth. And I think that opened my eyes to in-house teams or brands are going to want to have better control of what's going on. And so that was really the kind of first piece. I went, well, this starts to make more sense to come in-house. And then I think that was really the driver across the industry that really saw people pick up pace on in-housing.
And for those folks that don't have the depth of advertising experiences, what was this A&A study and what did it reveal? And what are actually like kickbacks in advertising?
So I'll take it pretty basic about it. I don't want to insult too many people if they're on the holding company sides. But basically the idea of a kickback is, look, let's pick a big advertiser in North America, right? So we'll pick on YouTube for 2 seconds or Hulu. You do a deal with them for X amount of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars, and you're able to get some kind of rebate back from them as a holding company, and with that, through that commitment. And that kickback coming back from a publisher, YouTube for example, wasn't always being passed directly back to the brand that was spending, but being held by the agency. And then the other part that was going on, and these are just two of the pieces, the study is quite a document, but was hidden margins being added into CPMs or into buying rates that were not visible to the client. And so they were working their way to be able to take a bit of extra margin off the top, which wasn't aware to the brand or to the client.
In this consulting role, were you like auditing brands, campaigns with some of these holding companies and some of these platforms and identifying margin extraction and cost savings if they were to be able to in-house?
Yeah, spot on. There's a whole world of consulting on CPMs and so forth. And to your point, we're looking at the added margin in there. And that's kind of the models that we were starting to help brands build, which was how much margin or how much do we think your agency taking today? How much money would it cost for you to build this in-house? So what's the savings you can generate? Before I go any further, I think that's probably one of my biggest learnings of doing the big in-housing at HP, which is don't put your bet on savings alone, because your finance team will continue to ask you for it, at least they do here. And you can only do it once, right? You save the money when you bring it in-house. The savings don't continue every year. And so it's been an interesting learning. But yes, 100% that was the model we were looking at, was could you generate savings, but also can we generate more performance with people being closer to the brand versus having, I don't want to say ulterior motives, but also just different thinking going on. So at the agency, you got to watch your margin, you got to watch your profit, X, Y, and Z, because you're a business, you got to make money. But then also on the other side, you've got to keep multiple clients happy. And so getting deep into one person's business is sometimes harder, especially if you're not the biggest advertiser at that agency.
And so what was next after the consulting gig?
After the consulting, I've just picked on him. I went back to an agency. Oh no, I went back to help out with some kind of programmatic media operations across Omnicom, which was really actually quite interesting, kind of getting into the depths of how the agency was trying to change based on the A&A study, and this world of in-housing started to pick up speed. But then I got bit by the bug again, and I got a call from HP, and they wanted to build an in-house agency. I'd been consulting and trying to help people do it. And I thought the best way to know if you can do this is do it yourself. So I came across to help the team here at HP in-house all of the media.
And as global head of media at HP, what exactly is that remit?
I think for me, it's looking after all of media, any media that HP runs. Theoretically, every single piece of media that is placed, and I say theoretically because it's a big company, HP, and there's probably something that I'm not aware of. But in general, it's looking after all media that we place of our own marketing spend. And that is working through. So we have in-house upwards of 90% of our media now, but there is still traditional media bought. There is still agencies needed for that to be able to do a big deal with it, a TV buy, things like that, also sponsorships and so forth. And so it's managing the agencies, also the in-house organization.
And so you mentioned that 90% of all of HP's media is now in-house. Obviously, that didn't just happen with a snap of a finger once you were hired. There was a sequence to getting to that 90%. And so how did you determine that sequence? What were the domino effects to build up to that percentage?
We focused in on one market to start with. So North America being our biggest focus. We focused on building that out, working out the plan. That was our kind of test market to see if we could do it, what it would look like, and then expanded across the globe. To be brutally honest, the area we spent the most time doing, and from the day I joined, we actually launched our first piece of media, was nearly 4 months. And that whole 4 months was not exciting, not a pretty time. It was sitting there working out, how can you pay an invoice? How can you write an IO? How can you do the kind of basic things that a media agency has to do inside a big computer company? And there was two things that came off my head when I first did it. I always say that an agency gets fired for, and I didn't want to fail at either of them. One is running the wrong ad, and the second one is not being able to pay a bill and getting behind on your invoicing. And so I wanted to make sure we had those two things solved before we did anything. That took us nearly 4 months to get that sorted.
And so you started with region. Did you think about the specific channel within the region? So in North America, what was the first media channel that you brought in? And then
yeah, I'm smiling because we focused on kind of digital, programmatic, social, and search together. The first one we actually launched was a paid social campaign for Coachella, which I actually launched myself on Facebook, which was a good laugh. Then we continued on, but it was across the three. We focused on one campaign at the beginning and then rolled out. We have multiple business units at HP. And so we rolled it out that way. So picking up campaign by campaign, not necessarily platform by platform, which allowed us to do more. It allowed us to grow and learn. Because the other part is you're bringing on a brand new team that's all coming in. They're learning HP at one side. They're trying to build processes on the other. And so it was about how can you bring in the organization and also grow. And so what we had to do was balance the kind of campaigns, because that was the easiest way for us to bring on talent versus bringing on platform expertise. And it was never perfect, right? Because people show up at different times as you hire them. And so we did, sometimes pieces were overloaded. Sometimes we had more people than we needed for a quarter until more campaigns showed up. But that was the approach until we got North America fully loaded. And then we went into EMEA and then into Asia. It was interesting because when we went to EMEA, we learned from that kind of slower roll. And so it was actually much more of an aggressive rollout. So we hired everybody. There was a team of nearly 50 people we hired in a 3-month span, and then we were off and running. Where in North America, it took us nearly a year to get the first one up and running. And then Asia, we followed suit, where it was much quicker rollout and pick up.
So you had a replicable playbook that
exactly.
you were able to extend globally.
Yeah, it was good fun, especially also, we did this through a pandemic, which made it even more fun because no one ever met anybody. Everyone was sitting at home doing this, which was a good laugh. So
no better time to be hands on keyboard than when you can't leave your home, right?
Exactly. And last year in October, I finally made it out to Barcelona as COVID restrictions lifted, and that was our EMEA team was based in Barcelona. And we got everybody together because we could finally at that point. And it was funny because I thought I was going to be meeting everyone for the first time, and everyone else was meeting everyone for the first time. And they've been working together for 2.5 years, and these people had never met. And it was pretty fun.
So how would you advise, if we take away the nefarious kickbacks and margin extraction that occurred in 2017 and 2018 and assume that everyone is transparent with fees, how would you advise a brand, if you put on your consulting hat now, on whether or not they should think about in-housing, or if they should even think about in-housing?
I think that there's a few pieces that went into it, right? One, does your company have the appetite for the increase in headcount, the increase in workload that's going to come to an in-house model versus an agency? Are you able to look at consistency of spend, consistency of media work, X, Y, and Z? If you're a very heavy fluctuating company with spend, right? Maybe you just push media in Q4, right, around Christmas or the holidays. It's going to be much harder for you to rationalize having people on staff all year round. So for me, that's one key area to really look at how it operates, and not just your marketing team's energy for an advertising media organization in-house, but your finance organization, your procurement organization, all of the other teams that are going to be pulled into this as you go through it, because they're all going to have to make pieces work. But the other part is looking at what is key in your media strategy as well. If you're very digital, very heavy optimization, D2C based brand, I think it makes a lot more sense for you to look at in-housing. If you're much more into, or you do much more big brand initiatives across huge TV buys, for example, you're probably going to need more of an agency structure to be able to help you do that. And so I think you can think about it that way as well, is what kind of media you're buying and how you can react to that. And I'm going to throw in one more because I'm picking this up a little bit as I go right now, because it's such a good question. I should have a really snap answer for it, but not many people have asked me. And the third one is your buying power, which is really critical. You have to think a little bit about if you're a really big spender on Google, you're probably going to have some weight to have a conversation and be able to do things. If you're also small on Google, they have solutions for it. But trying to do a deal with some of the publishers out there that are not used to working with a team of 2 or 3 people, maybe not going to be calling on your group, that you do have to think about pretty heavily, is can you still have clout and meet with the partners that you're going to need to be able to put together a good media strategy or tactical plan.
I love it. I'd like to dive deep on 2 of them. On the second one, the notion of media mix, you mentioned TV buys being the ones that you should lend itself to an agency. That's your typical, like, TV media buying is obviously still primarily purchased in linear through agencies. But as we all know, there's a disintermediation amongst linear TV moving to connected TV, in which it can be purchased programmatically in the not too distant future. Will your opinion change as the ability to purchase TV media becomes a little bit more connected, much more like a display ad or a Facebook ad?
Yeah, 100%. It's going to be interesting to watch. Everything is becoming more digital, right? It's connected TV, digital out of home, audio, right? All of that is becoming programmatic, or at least digitally enabled, pretty easy for somebody in-house to purchase. And as that becomes bigger and bigger, I think it's going to make it easier for in-house agencies and forth to operate, or in-house teams. My caveat to that is there is certain, just from a US perspective, right? There is the TV buying methodology, right? Which is these big upfront buys, locking in inventory. And then there's this kind of programmatic buying and bidding. And it's going to be interesting to watch what starts to win out, because does a Hulu still want a big upfront buy to lock in guaranteed revenue? And that will control if the agencies have more power still in the CTV space, or do they want more, I'm going to just say more profit, because to me, programmatic media and bidding is a good way to create profit, but doesn't create guaranteed revenue, where an upfront guarantees you revenue, but maybe not the profit side of things, because you're getting tighter margins or better CPMs for us. That's all right. I'm watching it and trying to work it out to see where we end up fully landing.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. Like, our TV media buying is primarily through the lens of Amazon, and many of the STV campaigns through Amazon you can purchase programmatically through their DSP, whereas their super premium inventory at the moment, like Thursday Night Football, still reflects almost IOs done primarily with the Amazon managed service, and they've yet to open up the floodgates with everyone. And I think that will probably be the model for most connected TV, in which for the super premium inventory, the platforms or the owners of those inventory will ensure a minimum guaranteed revenue threshold until they feel sufficiently confident enough that opening up the floodgates to the auction of everyone will meet or exceed that revenue threshold. I think I'm just going by the lens of Amazon. I'm sure you have other context through other players as well.
You can say Amazon, you could say YouTube does the same model. I saw YouTube just took being the largest CTV inventory in the world, right? So they just actually took out Netflix to lead that. But yeah, YouTube, Hulu kind of takes the same model. A lot of partners, NBC and so forth. So I think you're right. I think they will sell out their key inventory where they can lock it down, and then they put everything up to the old scatter model, but now the bidded model, which is exactly what you're saying, to see what they can sell. For me, it'll be really interesting because if they start to feel more confident in the programmatic buying or the more scatter model where they can make more revenue, will they start to shift their mentalities a little bit? And as the holding company or the in-house agencies get larger in scale, or there's more of them, how does that sort out someone like a Hulu or an NBC? Because they're going to have less. It was easy to go to the big four holding companies and do a deal. But now when you've got 130 advertisers or 140 advertisers, whatever it is, it's going to be harder to do those deals. And so how they actually deal with it will be also one to watch.
Because you would need lots and lots of salespeople to do many deals, or you build software to do it across the long tail of many advertisers and democratize the access to that. Ultimately, I imagine the ones that are able to build the best software, biased on the tech company guy, will probably win and be able to extract the highest revenue per user off of the CPMs on that inventory.
Yeah, Google, Facebook, Amazon, right? That's what they've done. They've built a beautiful solution to make advertising open to not just the big advertisers, but the SMB as well. So I tend to agree with you.
And then so on your third point, you need like having clout to own those relationships. Clout matters everywhere, right? Even on your Google, if you're working with Google, you want to know that you have a Google rep that will answer your emails and not be put in the queue. So it matters to a certain degree on every platform. But I think the interesting thing here is like you highlighted developing direct relationships with publishers as one of those things that only really matters when you have like weight and volume. When would the right time be? Like, what is a threshold for a brand, an example, to develop those relationships with publishers and such that publishers would listen and matter to a brand?
I don't know if I have a perfect formula for that one. I think it just depends, right? I think it depends what brand you are and also what industry you're working in, right? To get Hulu or an NBC or a Disney to come to the table, you need some quite serious media dollars, right, to be able to get them to start talking to you. If you're in, I'll pick on something HP, we're in 3D printing, there is 3D publications that we don't have to spend a Hulu size money before they will come and have a conversation with us. So I think it's a little hard to say, like, put a perfect number on it, but I do think you have to have you just need to be able to go out and talk to enough people. And so my thinking is, like, if you're a medium-sized business spending X amount of money, a few $1 million a year, for example, and you want to be able to go and talk to 100 publishers, building an in-house team that can do that, it's going to be really hard because you're going to be a team of 2 or 3 people. And so trying to manage those relationships is going to be near enough impossible. And so when I was talking about that, that's kind of what I'm thinking. So you have to be able to manage those relationships with the publishers if that's what you want to do. Because a lot of companies I've spoken to too have just bought in their bidded digital, right? Your Amazon, your Google, your Facebook, your social platforms, but left some of that direct media buying with the agency because they've got the relationships and so forth. And so that could be the hybrid model that works for that brand or client.
Makes sense. You described yourself as a programmatic guy through and through. We have a date coming up in the not too distant future, this cookieless future date in the forthcoming years. What does it mean? What does the cookieless future mean to us?
I love that you use the forthcoming years because it does seem like years because it keeps getting extended each year. I call myself a programmatic guy. Back when I first got into the industry, right, it was the dirty team in the corner buying the dodgy ads that no one wanted any longer. And it's grown into being, for me, the solution that is how we buy media today. But from an audience cookie perspective, right, we went down and the sell of programmatic in general across all platforms was the audience-based approach, right? You do not need to do your indexing on should you buy the New York Times because the demographics are correct. You can buy the one person on the New York Times that is the right person for my business. And so we went way down that. And then at HP, I think we went maybe too far down that route where we were trying to get so close to the individual. And the death of the cookie makes that hard to do. And the death of the cookie for me comes in, it was what is in 2 areas, right? There is the governing bodies that are starting to say, hey, look, the advertising industry is a little creepy. In some ways we are, in some ways we're not. And so they're trying to look after consumer privacy, which is a good thing. And then on top of that, to also empower consumer privacy and maybe with some other ulterior motives, you're seeing the big browsers also now remove the ability to track. And so what it's really affecting is our ability to target individuals, and that hyper target to a single individual. It is becoming pretty impossible, becoming harder and harder to do. And the one that's probably even worse is the ability to measure our campaigns is being impacted, because we used to be able to track and understand what did the person do afterwards. And for me, that's actually the bigger one. The beauty always for me for digital was that you could understand after someone saw an impression, what did they do? Did they purchase? Did they do what we wanted? And we could optimize in near enough real time. And it was always a panel. It was always a solution to try and work out if an audience did what you were hoping to. And so that was one of the big sales for digital when it first came out. And that's all becoming much harder. And that's the death of the cookie conversation that's going on.
An extension of that would be Apple made their recent changes in the past year or so, and there's been some clear winners and losers. Obviously, Facebook is one. Facebook and Snap primarily are the ones that are pretty transparent and overt in saying this business really messed up our business. I think Facebook has reported that it's at like about $10 billion in revenue loss, may even be more. So there's been clear winners and losers with this inflection point in digital advertising. Will that just exacerbate what's going on right now with the same divergence of these are the winners and losers? Or will it be a different set of winners or losers by this next inflection point?
It's a really good question. And I think there will be different winners and losers. I think that winners in this will be publishers and partners, right, who suddenly become more relevant again, because now we can't just go for an audience. We need to go find the context of the location of where that person might be reading, right? Back to, for HP, Red Ventures, which is CNET, right, the tech company, the tech publication. So we have to go back to them and call them up and work out a deal versus using an audience-based approach. So they're, for me, are huge winners. A lot of the cookie-based algorithmic approaches that were built to go across the open web, for me, are going to be the places where are going to start to struggle. I think people who have built tech on Amazon or built tech on Google and things like that will be okay, but the people who have built tech across the open web, it's going to be the challenge. And I'm not saying that there isn't solutions trying to be built. There is people like the Trade Desk building the UID, which tries to solve for that. But I do think that's where the biggest struggle will come. And then if I take it maybe 2 years further down the line, and if you look at things like what Google's doing with topic targeting, which is an API model for building cohorts of audiences, right? If we look at that, they're building a solution for me that works on Chrome. And then Apple talked about their DSP they're going to be releasing. And so you see Apple building out a solution. If that goes out, then you get the Apple devices that are being looked after by an Apple product. So to me, we actually end up creating another set of walled gardens, which we've talked about for the last few years in the media industry with Facebook and Google. But now we basically end up with browser-led walled gardens, and I don't want to say a browser because it's also OS on Apple or Android devices. And so you end up with that split controlling the buying ecosystem, which will be really interesting. And I don't know if a good thing or a bad thing quite yet.
Well, it's a good thing for Apple, not a good thing for Facebook, for one.
That's for sure. Yeah, exactly.
When people mention now purchasing these direct buys with publishers, this is what they mean by contextual targeting, correct? That these publishers fit a specific demographic in a specific location. That is the context. And you are now, rather than deterministically purchasing audience data tied to an identity, you are purchasing the media based on the context of the demographic coming to that media source and publisher, correct?
Yeah, spot on. And there's two ways we're doing it. There is the publisher-led, talking to the exact publisher and working with them through looking at data to say that this is the right content for us to read. And there is crawlers out there across the web that are trying to read websites and build contextually relevant data segments for us. So we can go ahead and target all the dog lovers because they're reading content that talks about dogs. And so we can go for that approach too, which is also another form of contextual targeting, which both will, I think, be more heavily utilized moving into the future.
We mentioned Amazon. That's a topic near and dear to our heart in the wonderful world of retail media. How do you approach retail media at HP? And what are some high-level thoughts?
It's a really good one. And it's very dear to our heart too, especially as a company that still sells most of its units through the channel or through retailers. It is a fundamental solution for us, and how we continue to work with retailers and so forth is really key. With regards to the media networks right now, it's an interesting one. I've talked to a lot of other people in the industry of where does retail media sit. It's been an interesting one because marketing's going, well, it's media, it's advertising, it's ours. It's something we should be doing. But sales going, well, we have an ROI on the back of this. It really fundamentally changes our performance. And so we've seen at HP, but also I've seen at multiple other companies that I've spoken to, a very interesting dynamic going on who should own retail media, which is fascinating. But then on to answer your other question around what my thinking is on it. As I said, I think it's fundamentally key for the business. I'm also really excited to see some other brands, as I just talked about, Google and Apple basically taking control, or Google, Apple, and maybe the social partners, if they can. The TikToks are just controlling the media industry, right? If you look now, Google and Facebook control 60% of all media dollars, right? I'm excited to see some other people playing in the space and starting to creep and push.
It's rare that you see anyone rooting for Amazon.
True.
Amazon is the underdog rooting for them, but
yes,
hey.
Yeah, exactly. I gotta help them out sometimes. And my other part I was going to say about my kind of concern, I think, around retail is around the incremental value of retail. And this is not picking on the retail space in general, but I think that we have a concern, or I have a concern and a risk of doing what we did with retargeting historically, in the sense of the ability, we're going to get so excited about the last click, the 2-second touch point to a conversion, that we're going to put tons of money into it and not really drive any incremental value. We're going to be dropping an ad right before the person purchases. And so as long as we can start to build out methodologies and strong measurement methodologies to make sure we're bringing incremental value, which is going to be there, especially if I think about for HP, if someone's looking for a laptop, we need to get them to go buy an HP, not a Lenovo, not a Dell. So that for me is really important. And so that's where the retail marketing comes in really. But if someone's looking for an HP laptop, and then we put an ad in front of them, what value do we bring? Protecting our brand, but you guys get the idea. And so that for me is my biggest concern and probably challenge with the retail marketing space, is how we make sure that we don't fall into that trap that we did with retargeting and so forth over the last few years.
Great. Where should retail media sit in your view?
I may be a little bit biased sitting in marketing right now, but it's a marketing tool. I think marketing teams in general with D2C, with better data in digital, have become closer and closer and more of a moving from, I don't want to say a cost center, because that really sounds like bad for marketing, but closer to a real true ROI center and revenue center. And so for me, it should sit in marketing. And I do think there's a lot of skill and expertise sits in the marketing media landscape today that can transfer into the retail space. So again, I'm biased, but that would be my point of view. At least that's the point of view I'm sharing inside HP.
And so given that means that marketing needs to work really well with the channel partners, the owners of the Amazon, Walmart, Target relationships, what are some best practices that you've developed over the past little bit at HP to make sure that there's harmony between the owner of the retail channel or marketplace and the marketing team?
I'm going to say there's some critical things we need to do. I don't know if we've got it solved at all today. We're still working through the relationship between what the sales team is driving, what we're doing, and how that kind of balance works. So with regards to best practices, it's just about collaboration. It's about understanding the goals and the incentives for the internal teams and for the retailer so that you can work out the best solution possible. And that's why I do think actually marketing makes sense for us to bring our marketing on our media perspectives into the room with the sales organization, with the retailer, and start to come up with really clever tool sets and so forth and approaches and strategies. It's like the best solution possible. So I know that's a bit of a non-answer, but I think it's a collaborative approach that we all need to go after, where we'll bring our expertise into one room.
And it's increasingly becoming more and more complex as some channels, like getting back to Amazon, are taking brand budgets through connected TV campaigns, where it's like, clearly this sits in marketing, but additionally, we need to be able to measure the downstream lift on this with actual conversion, not necessarily conversion metrics, but downstream metrics within Amazon and how it's driving the customer journey on the path to purchase. So TBD, still learning. Back to the topic of incrementality, it's obviously not everyone should be spending money on a lot of their branded terms. In particular, if it's a refill of an HB cartridge, you may not even spend any money on branded terms in that respect. So we all recognize the notion of not wanting to inflate ROAS for the purposes of inflating ROAS. But how do you actually measure incrementality?
If I just go back to like my statistical control exposed test or a match market based test, where we're able to look at conversion rates of the control group and the exposed group, and then look at the absolute and relative lift that we can drive between them. That's what we want to do. We have done it in multiple different approaches with Amazon, right? We've gone for the turn it off, turn it back on approach, which brings in natural bias, right? Because maybe the week you turned off was a really good week, and then a week ago you turned it back on, there was no stock, and that caused you some issues. And we've gone for match market testing as well. So those ones, I think, in the world of kind of in search and so forth, those are the approaches we've used for incrementality to the true lift. And then if you go to more of the, let's call it the Amazon DSP or any of the kind of more display media sets, we will run a charity banner or something like that for 5% of our media, or 6, whatever the control needs to be able to get a statistically robust lift, and then just rotate that into the messaging. And so look and see, how did Smokey the Bear do compared to our HP ad to give us lift? Sometimes Smokey wins, and that's not great, but it is, for me, that's the truest way to understand true lift, because we've got models and we do a lot of media mix modeling. We have MTA models that we've built and all of that. And I think those are fantastic, but the best way to check those is an incrementality test.
And your guidance is 5% of a budget should be allocated towards this?
What I would do is I'd run the conversion rate that you expect to have, look at the lift you need, and then run it through a t-test, and then look up what the number of conversions you need, and then back out that way. So if you're spending a lot of impressions in market, you can get it down to 5, 4, 3%. If you're not putting a lot of impressions in market, you might be at 50%. And so that's the approach we take. Go look at your sample size calculators online, and that's how we calculate what we'd go after.
You mentioned media mix modeling, and I believe you've been experimenting with Amazon Marketing Cloud as a tool to be able to do this.
Yes.
How are you leveraging Amazon Marketing Cloud in this way, and what is the promise that it brings for HP in your view?
We have been playing with AMC, not directly in my team, but we've got a group of data scientists having a whale of time with some pretty fascinating data. So we take it in to feed our media mix model, and that's really just bringing impressions, clicks, conversion data, bringing it in, modeling it, so that we can bring it in with the wider, all of our marketing spend across the board to see how Amazon affects that. So that was the most basic and simple use case. It wasn't that simple, but that was the use case we used it for. And then the team has done some amazing work to actually go into looking at bid strategies and build bid strategies and algorithms out off of the AMC data to better optimize our media based on the kind of incremental conversion data. And I can't tell you the numbers because I can't honestly remember them. But one of the things we saw actually was we had quite a good percentage of display media and search media in market on Amazon. And we really shrunk down our display and really pushed up our search spend based on some of the findings that we got out of AMC. Because at the time for the campaign and the specific product we were marketing, it made complete sense to run more search based on the budgets we had. And again, I know that everyone would need to do that differently. You don't suddenly all go turn off your display and put a bunch of money in search. But for us, that was what the AMC data was actually able to tell us to do, which was fantastic.
Without going in too far into the secret sauce, what were the leading indicators that showed that? Because we just spoke, Freddie, you and I just spoke about funneling all your dollars to last click, bottom of funnel media and how that isn't incremental.
Yep.
And now you're saying you're using this sophisticated technology to throw everything to the bottom of the funnel for incremental sales growth. So what did you find?
Yeah, beautiful contradiction in less than 10 minutes. But what we found is this was on more of a printing line and on our ink lines. And when someone's online needing ink, they need ink, right? They don't need an ad to make them think, do I need ink? You're in the mindset to make it happen. And so it was getting to that point. And so for us, it was an incrementality test. It was that kind of statistical understanding, but basically the model basically just told us that we needed to be right there to capture the person and make sure, though you might think that when you buy an HP printer, you always buy HP ink because that is logical. There is actually a lot of Remand or other ink providers trying to sell for an HP printer. And so it's actually quite a competitive space. So even if someone thinks they're buying an HP ink cartridge, we end up having to fight for that because a lot of other people are building the same cartridge for our printers. And so that's where the data kind of told us that that's the direction we have to go.
Awesome. That's a really good use case. I appreciate you sharing that story. We've spoken about future looking thoughts. We close out the podcast with a question for everyone. What's your prediction in 2023 for the wonderful world of media?
So in 2023, continued massive growth in CTV, massive growth in digital out of home. I'll bet on the cookie getting moved out further and Google not shutting it down in 23. I think that'll be a 2024 problem. But I do think massive growth in CTV and digital out of home and other digital channels coming online for kind of programmatic media buying. And then from a retail space, I expect just a ton of proliferation and more retail channels coming on board. So I feel like every single retailer I speak to today is building a retail network. And so I just expect a ton to show up, and it'll be a year of trying to work out which ones work for us and where we should be. So I guess those are probably my big bets on what will happen.
And so on the latter, like, how do you manage that? So some of these retailers are obviously now going to their channel team. Like, it's the inverse of what we were talking about before, in which retail media is led by marketing and needs to work in tandem with sales. But invariably, what I'm hearing from brands is now the JBP that they'll have with one of those retailers will include a percentage of retail media. So this is actually now led from the sales team that owns the retail relationship. It is now coming to you, Freddie, being like, hey, we got to spend X on this channel. How does that work? Am I right in saying that that's how it works for HP? And then how do you spread your team across all of the long tail of retailers at a global level?
So to your first one, yeah, there is retailers that are starting to put a percentage of spend against it. We live in a world of contra funding or MDF kind of funding that goes into our retailers. And so that piece is actually more of a marketing team trying to capture it and understand it versus, because usually actually our retailers run it for us versus us pushing it into a retail network. So it doesn't quite work in the sense of we're getting, oh, look, there's X amount of money that needs to be put onto this retailer. Hey, Freddie's team, can you help us sort that out? It's usually actually our team going out and saying, hold on a second, you just gave this much money to the retailer. We should have been involved in how that operates. So that we will have to work through. How we deal with all the retailers and also the different stages, right? If you think about Amazon and how sophisticated their models are, and then you've still got other retailers that are popping up that are really a black box media network that you're just supposed to give them cash and see what shows up at the end of the quarter, right? Well, one, we're not particularly a fan of that, so we're not really going to work with those people, but it's just prioritizing and working our way through. And then I do expect us to have to cross skill and bring new talent onto our retail media networks and off of maybe some of our other media, or I go out and hire. And what that exactly looks like is hard for us to predict, because if you actually just asked me today on how much money I'm going to spend on retail media next year, I couldn't even give you a guess. We are going to have to play it as we go through the year and see what happens.
Awesome. Love that. Freddie, thank you very much for your time. This was fantastic. Really appreciate it.
No worries. And thank you for having me on.
In the next episode,
you can double your conversion rate in a day with better creative. But I think that's really the power brands will start to realize and go is it's been such a traffic game. And now it's becoming a little more of a conversion game. And like what actually converts? What are the keywords that actually convert? What's the content that then converts against those keywords? Can you expand the keywords that convert or enhance conversion on keywords just by like changing some title changes, creative changes? And so I think that is going to be really interesting to see the science that evolves behind that next year.
Join us in the next episode for a chat with Aisha Khan, VP of Strategy Planning and Insights at Momentum Commerce. The episode drops March 2nd. This is Growth Sessions, a podcast to fuel your e-commerce growth. Listen and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen.